The snow had stopped some time after midnight, but the wind still pushed against the windows like it wanted in. I'd just finished checking the boiler logs when the front bell rang once, slow and deliberate. No footsteps on the porch, no car in the lot. Just that soft mechanical chime and a man standing in the entryway covered in snow holding a duffel bag that dripped onto the rug. He didn't say a word when I greeted him, just pointed at the guest book, then at the number 6 on the keyboard behind me. He signed with a name I couldn't read, something slanted and faint like he didn't want to be remembered. Let me know where you're listening from tonight, and if you've ever had a job where you were the only one awake at 2 a.m. And if these stories help pass the quiet hours, I hope you'll stick around for the next one. My name's Dana Ellis. I was 37 when this happened. I'd been working the front desk at a small lodge up near Fairplay, Colorado, one of those old ski stops built back in the 60s, all stone walls and knotty pine, with an honesty box for coffee and a stack of well-worn board games by the fireplace. Most of our winter guests were out-of-towners driving up from Denver trying to catch a weekend storm. It was January, the week after New Year's. Most of the tourists had already gone back home. We were half buried in snow and barely booked maybe 2 or 3 rooms a night. The regulars didn't come until February. I didn't mind the quiet. Nights were slow. I'd do paperwork chat with Len when he stopped by to check the furnace or shovel the back steps. He was our overnight maintenance guy, late 40s, always smelled faintly of menthol and motor oil, never in a hurry. That night I was alone at the front desk just before closing. Snow had been falling steady since dusk, and we hadn't had a new check-in since before dinner. I was thinking about locking up when the bell rang, and the man appeared just standing there in the glass vestibule, watching me, with this blank, steady expression. He didn't knock, didn't wipe his feet, just walked in after I buzzed him through. He had a heavy coat zipped all the way up a wool hat pulled low over his ears, and he never removed either one, not even when I handed him the pen to sign in. His gloves were thick, but I noticed the way he wrote slowly, like he wasn't used to writing much. No ID, no small talk, just cash. I told him we only had 2 rooms. Available numbers 6 and 8, but he didn't even glance at the board. He simply pointed to the 6th key the way someone might point to a specific item on a shelf they'd already decided to buy. I gave it to him, showed him the map, circled the room in red, and told him where the ice machine was. He nodded once. That was it. After he left, I stood there for a minute, watching the wet footprints melt into the welcome mat. I'd seen all kinds of guests in my 10 years at the lodge, but something about this one sat wrong. It wasn't that he was rude, just hollow, like he was moving on autopilot. Room 6 was one of our older units' ground floor, tucked near the end of the West Hall, a quieter corner of the building. I usually offered it to couples or solo hikers who wanted peace and didn't mind the dated fixtures. Len called it the quiet room mostly, because the heater worked too well and the walls were thicker than the rest. About an hour after the man checked in, I went through my routine, locked the side entrances, turned off the lobby lamps, logged the weather report in the logbook. The snow had finally stopped, but the wind was still sharp. We had no other check-ins expected, and all the lights in the guest wing were off, except a soft glow under the door of room 6. I didn't think about him again until around 2:15, when Len came in through the back hallway. He had snow crusted on his collar and was muttering about drifts building up near the service shed. We sat in the break room drinking stale coffee, and I mentioned the last-minute guest. Len frowned when I told him what time the guy arrived. Saw his tracks in the snow out back, he said. Coming from the tree line, not the road. No tire marks in the lot either. Didn't see him go in. I laughed mostly to shake the chill that ran up my neck and told him maybe the guy parked on the shoulder and walked in. Len didn't answer, just took another sip and stared at the dark window, like he was expecting to see something move out there. Around 3 I did my last walk of the night, checked the side doors, peeked in the laundry room, did a quick pass down the west hall. Everything was quiet except room 6 had the television on. I could hear it faintly through the door. Not a show, just static. That soft, whispery snow sound you get when a signal drops. I paused outside for a moment. The light was still on, and I could hear movement inside. Not walking, not voices, just the subtle shift of someone adjusting in a chair or getting up and sitting back down again. No pattern, no urgency, just presence. I tapped on the door, called out softly to ask if everything was all right. The movement stopped. The static buzzed on. No reply. I waited another minute, then gently knocked again, still nothing. I considered opening the door, but policy said not to, unless there was a clear emergency. I left a note under the door, asking the guest to come to the desk if he needed anything. The next morning, I came in early to prep breakfast baskets. The snow had crusted into ice overnight, and the sun was just barely touching the tops of the pines. I checked the ledger and saw room 6 hadn't been touched. No phone calls, no messages, no checkout. At 10:45, well past checkout time, I walked down the west hall with a fresh towel bundle. The light under the door was still there. Same pale yellow sliver unmoving. I knocked again, harder this time. Still no answer. I used the passkey. The room smelled faintly of old snow and wet wool. The TV was still on, still static. But the bed was perfectly made. Sheets crisp, blanket folded. No luggage, no coat, no duffel. Just the key resting on the bedside table and a single glove lying on the windowsill. Len searched the property. We checked the camera in the lobby. It showed the man coming in at 12:42 a.m. It never showed him leaving. The tracks out back. They disappeared halfway into the trees. Just a long trail of prints that ended in untouched snow. We reported it, gave the sheriff the note he'd signed. But the name was gibberish, and the money he'd paid with turned out to be old bills. 1980s series worn almost smooth. Room 6 stayed empty for the rest of that winter. No one wanted to sleep there, not after the man who never spoke and never left. The last real job I ever had was working graveyard shift security at a warehouse just outside Allentown. It was one of those old distribution centers built in the 70s. Long concrete spine, no windows, and motion lights that always took a second too long to click on. You'd walk 50 yards before the hallway noticed you. I'd worked there 6 years by that point, nights only. It wasn't exciting, but it was steady, predictable. Until Wesley showed up. He was hired during a staff shortage one November just before Black Friday, when the place went into overdrive. We handled mostly mid-sized electronics, headphones, routers, laptops, that kind of thing. Stuff that moved fast and had to be kept secure. I was the floor supervisor, not security per se, but I managed the night crew, which meant I was the last one to leave if anything went wrong. Wesley was younger than the rest of us, maybe mid-20s, shaved head, no facial hair, always wore the same dark gray hoodie under his reflective vest. First few nights he barely spoke, just did his route, picking orders, scanning shelves, restocking where needed. He was efficient, but there was something off about his pacing. The way he moved through the aisles didn't match the usual flow, like he wasn't working in sequence but moving to some rhythm only he knew. At first, I figured he was just quiet. We get all kinds on night shift. People who can't sleep, people avoiding something at home. It's not my place to pry. But by the end of his first week, I started noticing things that didn't make sense. Inventory numbers that looked right on paper, but felt wrong in practice. A shelf that had been scanned as verified, even though no one had gone near it that night. A return bin filled with unopened boxes, tags still sealed. I mentioned it to Wes during a smoke break out back, just casual. Asked if he'd scanned Zone C already, even though the handheld logs didn't show a timestamp. He just nodded once and said, "It was early. You probably missed it." His tone was flat. Not defensive, but not friendly either. More like a placeholder sentence. The next night, I caught him standing in the far corner of the cold storage bay, just standing there in the dark. I'd gone in to double-check a leak we'd flagged earlier in the week. He wasn't moving, wasn't scanning, just standing, staring at the far wall. No flashlight, no handheld. I called his name, and he turned, but didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Thought I heard something back here," and walked past me without waiting for a response. The security office had a set of motion-triggered cameras, and I started checking them more than usual after that. Not because I suspected anything criminal, just something. I'd rewind the footage from 2 or 3 a.m., and there Wesley would be walking into sections that didn't have open work orders, circling the same aisle twice, sometimes pausing at empty shelves like he was waiting for something to appear. 2 weeks in, he started talking more, but it didn't make anything better. His questions were strange, like what time the building had been built, or whether we'd ever found things that didn't belong, like extra pallets or boxes without barcodes. Once, he asked if I'd ever seen someone walking the upper walkways, even though that part of the warehouse had been sealed off for years. I told him no, and he nodded like he expected that. The weirdest part was none of the other guys seemed to notice. I asked Rick, our forklift lead, if Wesley seemed off to him. He just shrugged and said, "Quiet kid, but works hard." Even joked that it was nice to have someone who didn't complain every 5 minutes. I let it go for a while. Maybe I was just overthinking things. Nights do that to you. Then came the shift he didn't clock out. It was a Tuesday. Weather was clear, a little cold. Nothing unusual. Wesley showed up on time. Logged in at 10:02 p.m. We did our rounds. I passed him near Zone D around midnight and gave him the usual all-clear nod. He nodded back. That was the last time I saw him. At 6:15 a.m., I did my end-of-shift walkthrough. Warehouse lights were on low-cycle forklifts, idle handhelds docked. I always do a final check for stragglers just to make sure no one's asleep in the break room or lost in the back aisles. No sign of Wes. I checked the locker room. His stuff was still in his cubby bag, lunch water bottle. Untouched. That's when I checked the punch-out log. Nothing. He never scanned out. I walked the whole building again. Every aisle, every bay. Even the roof access door, which was locked and sealed. No sign of him. The only odd thing was a handheld scanner lying face down behind pallet row 17 display, cracked battery dead. The kind of thing you'd drop if you slipped, but there were no footprints, no skids, no sign of movement on the dusty floor. I called it in. Our site lead wasn't in yet, so I reached out to building security. They pulled the overnight footage. That's where things got worse. There was no footage of Wesley leaving. None of him entering cold storage. No images of him beyond 2:11 a.m., when he walks past camera 3 near Zone D. After that, nothing. Not a single motion alert, not a frame of footage showing him in or out. The cops showed up around 9. Officer Brewster was the one who took my statement. Older guy, calm, asked more about Wes than I could answer. I told him what I knew. The odd behavior, the unanswered questions, the sense that Wes was looking for something in the building. He listened, but didn't say much. They found his phone later that afternoon, shoved behind a false panel in the cold storage maintenance room. The battery was still charged. Last outgoing text was time-stamped 2:17 a.m., 4 minutes after the last camera picked him up. It was a single-line message sent to an unknown number. Just said, "They're real. They're below." That's it. They did a full building sweep, dogs, heat sensors, even checked the storm drains behind the east dock. Nothing. No sign of him. It became a missing persons case, but without much to go on. Brewster called me a few days later to ask if I remembered anything else, any change in behavior. I told him no, but that wasn't exactly true. A week after Wesley disappeared, I came in early for a shift handoff and found a single box left in the receiving area. No shipping label, no order code. Just a plain brown cube, sealed and unmarked. I brought it inside, opened it on the main table. Inside was a gray hoodie folded neatly. Looked identical to the one Wes always wore. But what froze me was the inside hem. Someone had written in Sharpie near the tag just a few words. "They don't like the lights." I didn't tell anyone. I just walked the box out back and tossed it into the incinerator bin with the rest of the damaged inventory. Later that night, I walked the floor like usual. Everything was in order. But near Zone D, I found a footprint in the dust. A single right shoe print facing the wall. The kind of print you leave when you stand still for a long time. The warehouse is still open, still running night shifts. But I took early retirement the next year. I told people it was because of the stress. Truth is, I just couldn't walk those aisles anymore without feeling watched. Some nights I still dream I'm back there walking between shelves, hearing the hum of the lights above, turning a corner and seeing someone in a gray hoodie just standing there, not facing me, not moving. And when I call out his name, he raises one hand like he hears me. But he never turns around. I don't usually stay in other people's houses. Something about walking barefoot in a stranger's kitchen always put me on edge. But that summer work was slow, and I'd promised myself a break. Something cheap and quiet. I picked a last-minute Airbnb near the South Carolina coast, a little bungalow with a screened-in porch and enough charm to feel lived in, but not too personal. It was listed by a woman named Miss Ruth, who said she'd owned it since her husband passed. It was late July, humid in a way that felt like a wet towel draped over your shoulders, but the breeze off the water helped. The bungalow was maybe half a mile from the beach, just far enough from the boardwalk to avoid the weekend crowds. There was a seafood place around the corner and a gas station where I could grab snacks or a Coke without needing to drive. I got in on a Thursday around 5 p.m. The key was under a ceramic frog, just like the message said. The porch light was already on. Miss Ruth left a handwritten welcome note on the table. Said she hoped I found peace there, that the sunsets were worth staying up for. The house had that soft, dusty smell old beach houses get. Not dirty, just settled. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, wicker furniture with sun-faded cushions, and a little shelf of mystery paperbacks in the corner. The place was fine, quaitai. But from the start, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had just left. Like the fridge still had the shape of a handprint on the handle, or the closet door wasn't closed all the way when I swore I hadn't opened it. The first night was uneventful. I had a late dinner, watched a few episodes of something forgettable, and fell asleep with the ceiling fan clicking steadily above me. The bed was soft in the wrong way, but I was too tired to care. The next morning I walked to the beach, stayed out a bit too long, and came back pink around the shoulders. The front door stuck a little when I opened it, like it had swollen from the heat, but it was locked just as I'd left it. Inside, everything looked the same, except the bathroom light was on. I hadn't left it that way. I remembered turning it off because the bulb flickered and made a faint humming noise that had bugged me the night before. Still, I told myself maybe I'd forgotten. I had a mild sun headache, and I wasn't about to jump to conclusions. That night I couldn't sleep as easily. I kept hearing soft creaks, not sharp enough to be footsteps, just the kind of settling sounds you tell yourself not to worry about. Around 3 a.m., I thought I heard the screen door shift slightly, the hinges giving off that soft metallic complaint. I lay still, holding my breath, waiting to hear it again. It didn't come. In the morning, I went out to the porch and found the ashtray had been moved. I hadn't touched it, didn't even smoke. There was a small, dark mark inside, like a burned edge of something paper. I checked the porch camera, but of course, there wasn't one. The listing didn't say anything about exterior cameras, and I hadn't thought to bring one of my own. I went to the gas station down the street for coffee, the kind from a pot that had probably been sitting there since 4 a.m., and tried to act normal. The man behind the counter was maybe late 60s friendly. In that way, old Southerners can be chatty without being invasive. I mentioned I was staying up the road and asked if it was a quiet area. He looked up from my change, nodded slowly, and said, "Usually is. 'Cept that little house got broken into last winter. No damage, just someone had the key." He paused a beat, then added, "Miss Ruth changed the locks after that, I think." I didn't say much after that. Just smiled, nodded, and walked back with the coffee getting cold in my hand. That night I left a light on in each room. Something about that sentence, "someone had the key," had gotten under my skin. I double-checked the windows, tested the door, wedged a chair under the knob for good measure. I woke up around 2:40 a.m. to the sound of the toilet flushing. Not dripping, not humming pipes, a full flush. I sat up in bed so fast I felt lightheaded. I didn't move, just listened. No footsteps, no door opening or closing, just silence. I stayed there for hours, staring at the bedroom door. When the sun finally came up, I walked the entire house. Nothing was missing, nothing was out of place. but the bathroom smelled faintly like someone had just used it, that warm, steamy chemical scent of water that's been recently disturbed. I called Miss Ruth that afternoon, told her I had a few questions about the property. She was polite, but distracted like she was doing something else while we talked. When I asked about the locks, there was a long pause. Then she said, "The handyman changed them in January. But it's an old place. Maybe it still feels like someone's there." I asked if the place had cameras. She laughed softly and said no. "I don't want folks feeling watched while they're trying to rest." That night I sat on the couch with the TV on, but the volume low. Every light in the house was on. Around 11:30, the screen door creaked again, this time more clearly. Like someone had stepped onto the porch and let it close behind them slowly. I muted the TV, just sat there staring at the front door, which I could just barely see from the couch. I didn't move, didn't call out. After a few minutes, I heard nothing more. No knock, no footsteps, just silence. But in the morning, the porch light, which I'd switched off before bed, was back on. I left the house that day, packed my things before noon, and drove north without even canceling the rest of the reservation. I didn't leave a note, didn't leave a review. A week later, I got a message through the Airbnb app. It was from Miss Ruth. Just one line. "Hi, Haley. Hope everything was all right. I found your phone charger and a pair of sandals. Let me know if I should mail them." I never responded. About 2 months after that, I was scrolling late one night and found the listing again. Same photos, same porch. But this time, something in the last image caught my attention. It was just the hallway, a shot of the bathroom door slightly ajar. You had to zoom in to really see it, but there was a shape reflected in the mirror. A person. Shoulders, chest just barely visible. Not Ruth, not me. Someone else. I grew up in a farm town that wasn't more than a dot on a map. For us, the highlight of the year was always the fair. It rolled through every September, a week of lights, fried food, and the kind of excitement small towns rarely saw. By the time I was a senior in high school, it wasn't just about rides or corn dogs anymore. It was about being out late, walking around without parents, and feeling like you were part of something bigger than the town we all knew too well. That year, 2007, I went with my 2 closest friends, Charlie and Denny. Both were loud, restless kids who made everything a little more chaotic than it needed to be, but I didn't mind. We had one goal that night: stay out until closing, then walk home with the smell of funnel cakes still clinging to our clothes. The fairgrounds were busy, but not overwhelming, just the usual hum of generators, carnival music, and people talking over each other. The Ferris wheel stood over everything, lights pulsing against the night sky. I remember the coolness in the air that told you fall was coming. We spent the first couple of hours bouncing between games and rides. Charlie tried to win a stuffed bear for a girl he barely knew. Denny kept getting in arguments with the game operators, insisting the bottles were weighted. Around 10 o'clock, we ended up near the row of tents with photo booths. The kind where you cram in with friends, drop a few bills, and get a strip of black and white pictures. Denny suggested it. Said we needed something to prove we were there that night, something we'd laugh about years later. We piled in, shoulders pressed together, the machine smelling faintly of ozone and dust. The flash went off 4 times each, brighter than the last. We came out laughing, waving the strip while it developed. That was when I noticed her. She was standing just outside the booth, maybe 5 feet away. Long, dark hair, pale face clothes that looked plain compared to the usual fair outfits. A simple blouse skirt, nothing flashy. She didn't smile, didn't look like she was waiting for anyone. Just stood there watching. "Go on, ask her in." Charlie nudged me. He always did that, tried to push me toward any girl who so much as looked in my direction. Before I could say anything, she stepped closer. Her voice was quiet but clear enough. "Do you mind if I'm in the next one?" It was odd, but we were 17, 18 years old, and the idea of a girl, a stranger wanting to be in our photo booth felt more like a story to brag about than a red flag. We shrugged, stepped aside, and let her slip in. She didn't sit all the way back, just leaned slightly against the side curtain, like she wasn't sure she belonged there. The machine clicked. The flash went off 4 more times. I thought I saw her glance toward me. In one of them, though it was hard to tell with the brightness. When we stepped out, the photo strip slid down into the tray. We crowded around to look. There were only 3 of us. Charlie laughed at first, like maybe the camera had glitched, but each of the 4 frames showed only me, Charlie, and Denny. The girl wasn't there. Not blurred, not half-cropped out, just gone. She didn't lean in far enough, Denny muttered, though I knew that wasn't true. She had been right there. Close enough, I could have reached out and touched her sleeve. We turned around. The space beside the booth was empty. No trace of her. The crowd pressed past kids with glow sticks, parents herding toddlers, couples walking hand in hand. No one paying attention to us. We stood there longer than we should have, waiting for her to reappear. She didn't. Eventually, Charlie made a joke, said it was probably just some girl messing with us, and dragged us back toward the rides. But the mood had shifted. I kept the photo strip, stared at it all night, flipping it over in my pocket. An hour later, near closing, we were headed toward the exit when Officer Delgado stopped us. He was county police, a man we all knew by name, the kind who showed up at football games to keep the peace. He asked if we'd seen a girl matching a certain description. Dark hair, light blouse, maybe 15 or 16. Last seen near the photo booths. None of us answered right away. Charlie shook his head. Denny said no. I opened my mouth to mention the booth, but couldn't force the words out. Something about the way the officer's face tightened told me this wasn't just a missing person announcement. He looked tired, worn. We went home. None of us spoke much during the walk. The fair lights faded behind us until the night was just dark and quiet again. A few days later, a rumor spread through school. A girl had gone missing during the fair. No one seemed to know her name, but some claimed she wasn't from our town at all, that she'd come with cousins from out of state. Others said she was a runaway. Some whispered she'd been seen walking into the woods past the fairgrounds and never came back. I didn't tell anyone about the booth. Didn't tell Charlie or Denny that I still had the strip. Sometimes late at night I'd pull it out and look at it under my desk lamp. 3 faces caught in the brightness of the flash, and the empty space where she should have been. Years later, I went back to the fairgrounds. Not during the fair, just in the off-season when the place was bare dirt and a few storage sheds. I found the corner where the booths had been now just gravel and weeds. I stood there a long time listening to the wind move through the grass. I still have that photo strip. It's yellowed now, edges curled. But every time I look at it, I remember the way she leaned in the faint smell of her perfume, and the way she disappeared into the crowd. Sometimes I wonder if she was ever really there at all. The strangest thing about working overnight at a gas station isn't the silence or the smell of burnt coffee that lingers no matter how many times you clean the pot. It's the repetition. The same trucks roaring past toward the border. The same tired shift workers grabbing cigarettes on their way home. The same rattling soda machine that spits out more ice than drink. Patterns become your only sense of time when the hours between midnight and sunrise start to blur together. I worked one of those stations just outside Alamosa off Highway 285. We weren't near much, a couple of motels, a tire shop, and the endless dark stretches of desert highway. By my second month, I could almost predict who would walk through the door and when. That was when I noticed him. It was a Thursday night in February, just after 3 in the morning. A man pulled up in a faded silver sedan, headlights cutting across the empty lot. He walked in with his hood up, hands shoved deep into the kangaroo pocket. He didn't look around, didn't even make eye contact. He just said, 12 on pump 3. I rang it up, slid the receipt across, and he left. No small talk, no hesitation. He pumped exactly $12 worth, hung the nozzle, and drove off into the night. At first, I didn't think much of it. People do strange things when they're tired, and maybe 12 was all he had in cash. But the next night at the exact same time, 3:17 a.m., the same car rolled in. The same man in the same blue hoodie came inside. He didn't glance at the candy rack or the soda cooler. Just the same words, 12 on pump 3. It went on like that for a week, always at 3:17. Always $12. Always pump 3. His voice never changed, calm but flat, like he was reciting lines he'd memorized long ago. By the 10th night, I started to dread hearing the door chime at that exact minute. I'd look up from the register and already know what I'd see. The hood, the shadowed face, the bills folded tightly together. When I tried to make small talk, asking if he was headed somewhere or just passing through, he gave me nothing. Not rude, just blank, like the words never registered. One night I stepped out onto the lot as he filled up. The air was bitter cold, snow flurries blowing across the empty asphalt. I asked if he wanted me to top off the windshield washer fluid, something we offered for free. He froze for half a second, nozzle still in hand, then said quietly, "No, just 12. He set the nozzle back, slid into the car, and drove off. I started watching the cameras more closely. Each night I'd rewind the footage just to confirm it wasn't my imagination. The timestamp never wavered, 3:17 on the dot. The way he walked never changed. Even the way he held the bills in his hand stayed the same. By the third week, I called the regional dispatcher to ask if they'd had reports of suspicious activity near pump skimmers or card fraud. She told me no, but I could almost hear the shrug in her voice. It wasn't a crime to buy gas at the same time every night. Still, it ate at me. One night I tried something different. Instead of waiting for him to come inside, I disabled pump 3 for maintenance and left the rest of the lot open. When his car rolled up, he stepped out, walked toward the pump, and stopped. He stood there staring at the screen for a long moment before coming inside. "Pump 3's down tonight," I said, trying to sound casual. You can use any of the others." He didn't answer at first, just stared at me. His hood cast most of his face in shadow, but I could see his jaw working slightly, like he was clenching his teeth. Then he said, 12. Pump 3. I repeated myself, explaining again that 3 was out of service. He didn't argue, didn't get angry. He just turned, walked out, slid back into his car, and drove off without pumping a drop. The lot was empty again before I even thought to move. That was when it shifted from strange to unsettling. For 2 nights, he didn't show. I almost convinced myself it was over, that he'd found another station, or finally run out of money for his ritual. But on the 3rd night at 3:17, exactly, the sedan rolled in again. This time I didn't wait behind the counter. I stepped outside as he pulled up. The wind was sharp enough to sting my face. He lowered his window just a crack as I approached. "You don't have to come anymore," I told him. Not sure why I said it. "Whatever this is, you can stop." He looked at me then, really looked. His eyes were pale in the glow of the overhead lights, too pale, almost washed out. He whispered something I couldn't make out, and then the window slid up. He drove away without pumping gas. I filed a report the next morning, half embarrassed at how shaky my voice sounded over the phone. The trooper who called me back, Martinez, I think said they'd check it out, but without a plate number or crime, there wasn't much to do. The following night, I braced myself. I told myself not to look at the clock, not to anticipate it. But when the numbers flicked over to 3:17, the headlights cut across the lot once more. This time, he didn't stop at a pump. He parked by the edge of the lot and sat there, engine idling, lights pointed straight at the glass doors of the station. He never came inside, never moved, just sat in the driver's seat, staring. I called it in. My hands shook, dialing. The dispatcher's voice was calm, too calm, as if she were reading from a script. "A unit will be there soon. Stay inside." I waited, pacing behind the counter, heart pounding each time I glanced toward the windows. He was still there when the trooper pulled in, 15 minutes later, lights flashing. But when the officer approached the car, it was empty. Engine still running, driver's side door wide open. No one inside. They searched the lot, the ditches, even down the road a ways. Nothing. The trooper finally shut off the ignition, called a tow, and told me to get some rest. I never saw him again after that night, but I still wake up sometimes at 3:17, staring at the red glow of the alarm clock, waiting for headlights to sweep across my window. And every time I drive past that gas station pump, 3 still catches my eye. It's always empty. The last breakdown I ever responded to happened out on Highway 95, south of Goldfield. I've been around trucks my whole life, and usually nothing about a stranded rig surprises me anymore. But that night had something in it I still can't place. And even now, when I think about it, I can almost feel the grit of the desert wind against my teeth. I was 52 then, working nights as a mobile mechanic for a tow outfit that handled semis across the Nevada desert. My phone rang just past midnight. Dispatch said a tractor-trailer was sitting half off the shoulder with its hazard lights flashing and the driver not answering calls. A trooper had already passed the location and confirmed it wasn't blocking traffic, but they wanted me to go check it out. I loaded up my service truck and headed south. If you've never driven that stretch at night, it's nothing but scrub sand and the occasional ghost town diner with the lights already dark. The sky feels like it hangs lower out there, heavy with stars, and every mile seems to echo against itself. By the time I spotted the glow of hazard lights, I'd already rehearsed what I'd say to some drowsy driver who'd just given up on the night. The rig was pulled over at an angled trailer tilted onto the gravel shoulder. The engine wasn't running. I parked ahead of it and grabbed my flashlight, the beam cutting through the dust. The wind kept throwing up. I rapped on the door, expecting a groggy face to peek down, but the cab was empty. Both doors were unlocked. Inside, it looked like someone had just stepped out for a smoke. Thermos, half-full logbook open headlights, switch still on. But there were no keys in the ignition, no sign of the driver anywhere along the ditch line when I checked. I radioed it in, letting dispatch know the vehicle was unattended. The operator patched me through to a trooper who said they'd send someone back around. That should have been the end of it. But as I sat in the cab waiting, I noticed something odd. A paper napkin was tucked carefully into the logbook, not crumpled or used, just placed there, like a marker. Written across it in shaky pen were 4 words. "You're almost out west." It didn't make sense. The driver was already in Nevada, already about as west as you can get without hitting California. And the phrasing didn't sound like a note you'd leave for yourself. I put it back, trying not to think about it, but the longer I sat there, the less I liked the silence. Truck stops and breakdowns all come with their own kind of noise. Idling engines, radios, even coyotes in the distance. This was different. It felt like everything around me had stepped back, like the desert itself was holding its breath. The trooper showed up about 40 minutes later. By then, I'd already walked the length of the trailer twice and checked the tires all fine. He gave the place a quick look and said he'd run the plates. When the call came back, his tone shifted. The truck was flagged as stolen out of New Mexico 2 days earlier. The registered driver wasn't the one who'd checked it out of the yard. We both stood there a while longer, not sure what to do next. Then the trooper walked around to the passenger side and noticed something in the sand. 2 sets of boot prints moving away from the cab and down into the wash. They weren't hurried, not the kind of tracks you'd expect from someone ditching a stolen rig. Just a steady line of steps into the dark. He radioed for backup and told me to wait by my truck. I did, but I couldn't stop looking at those prints. They led off into the kind of desert that swallows people whole if they wander too far. And for some reason, I had the strongest urge to follow them, like the tracks themselves were pointing to an answer I didn't really want. 2 more patrol cars showed up. The officers followed the prints about half a mile before coming back. No people, no campfire, no tracks turning back. Just sand gradually erasing itself in the wind. They logged the vehicle for impound and told me I could head home. That should have been it. But as I was packing up, I noticed the napkin was gone. I hadn't touched it again, hadn't mentioned it to anyone, but the space in the logbook was, empty. I thought maybe the wind had caught it, but the cab was shut tight. It was just gone. I tried not to think about it for a few weeks, told myself I'd imagined more than was there. Then one afternoon, I stopped at a diner outside Beatty for lunch. It was the kind of place with laminated menus and cracked leather booths. I slid into a seat and didn't notice anything unusual until the waitress set down my plate. Tucked under the edge like it had been waiting was another napkin. On it, the same uneven handwriting. "You're almost out west." I left my food untouched and walked out without paying. My hands were shaking too badly to even start the truck right away. After that, I stopped taking night calls, told the shop I'd handle days, only even if it meant fewer hours. They didn't argue, and maybe that should have been the end of it. But every so often a friend will send me a picture, an old gas receipt tucked under their wiper, a note left on a diner counter, a scrap of paper slipped under a hotel door. Always the same words. I can't explain it. I never saw the men who walked off into that desert, never found out who wrote the message, never learned what it was meant to warn or promise. All I know is that the phrase won't leave me alone, and each time I see it, it feels a little closer, like something trying to catch up. I still keep odd hours, still drive long stretches of empty highway when the rest of the world is asleep. And sometimes when the dash clock flicks past midnight and the desert stretches out on either side, I almost expect to look down and find another napkin waiting in my lap. It hasn't happened yet, but I can't shake the feeling that it will. I was 19 when I moved into my first apartment, a small brick complex on the edge of Ann Arbor. It was a starter place for students like me, cheap and thin-walled, with buzzing hall lights that never fully lit the stairwell. I thought it was freedom, the kind you get when you finally leave the dorms behind. Looking back, I should have paid closer attention to the strange details I noticed in that building from the very beginning. My unit was on the second floor, directly above a one-bedroom labeled 1A. I never saw much activity down there, though. Sometimes I'd hear faint music at night, like an old radio playing through static. The manager told me an older man lived there alone. Quiet paid his rent on time, never caused issues. She said it like she'd rehearsed it. I shrugged it off. About 3 weeks in, I was coming home late from a programming lab when I noticed something odd. A man I'd never seen before was standing at the door to 1A, knocking softly, almost rhythmically. He wasn't dressed like a student. His clothes were plain worn, and his posture was stiff, as if he didn't want to be noticed. He didn't look at me as I passed. I figured he was a friend or relative, but the next night it happened again. Different man, same door. This one carried a paper bag like groceries, but he didn't go inside. He knocked, waited, and then left the bag on the floor when no one answered. When I left for class in the morning, the bag was gone. Over the following weeks, it became a pattern. Sometimes it was a man, sometimes a woman, always at night, always at the same door. They never stayed long, and I never once saw the supposed tenant of 1A open it. If he was inside, he didn't make himself known. I began to wonder if the apartment was even occupied at all. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I waited until one of the visitors left, then crept down to look. Nothing remained in front of the door. But when I leaned closer, I saw a faint outline on the wood as if notes had been taped there and removed again and again. The door handle was cold to the touch, colder than the rest of the hallway. A week later, I woke to soft tapping through the floorboards. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the old building settling. But when I pressed my ear to the carpet, I heard it clearly, 3 knocks. A pause, then 2 more. Not random, but deliberate. The next morning, I asked the manager about the man in 1A. She frowned, shuffled through her folder, and said there wasn't anyone by that name in her system. In fact, she said the unit had been vacant since the previous fall. When I told her about the visitors, her face tightened. She told me to mind my own business and keep my door locked at night. That evening I set up my laptop by the window overlooking the lot. Around 2 in the morning, a dark sedan pulled in and parked with its lights off. 2 men stepped out, neither carrying anything, and walked straight into the building. They didn't knock on 1A. They simply stood there for a long time in silence, facing the door. Eventually, one of them crouched down and slid something under it. Then they both left without saying a word. I didn't sleep after that. The following day, I called the non-emergency police line and reported suspicious activity. Officer Lyman met me later that evening. He listened carefully, asked questions, then went to check the unit himself. When he came back, he looked unsettled. He told me the apartment was empty, bare, with no furniture, and a layer of dust thick enough to show his footprints. He didn't find any notes or packages. He advised me to keep my curtains closed and call if anything escalated. 2 nights later, it did. I woke to voices in the hall, low and urgent. I crept to my peephole and saw 3 people outside 1A. They weren't knocking anymore. One of them had a key. They let themselves in and closed the door behind them. I waited, holding my breath. Minutes passed, then an hour, then more. No one came out. At 4 in the morning, the door opened again, but only 2 people left. The third never reappeared. I reported it again. By the time officers arrived, 1A was empty. No sign of forced entry. No sign anyone had been there at all. I started crashing on friends' couches after that, too unsettled to stay alone. On one of those nights, I returned for a few clothes and found a slip of paper tucked under my door. In small, shaky handwriting, it said, "Don't watch." I moved out a month early, forfeiting my deposit. The manager didn't fight me on it. Before I left, I asked her one more time about 1A. She wouldn't meet my eyes. All she said was that some doors are better left shut. To this day, I don't know who those visitors were or what they wanted from that empty apartment. I only know that I wasn't supposed to notice them, and when I did, they made sure I understood the warning. That was the last story I'll share tonight. Thinking about it now, I realize how ordinary the settings always were. Apartments, diners, motels, quiet roads, small towns. None of them were the kinds of places people imagine when they think about fear. And maybe that's what makes them harder to forget. The truth is, we expect danger to show itself clearly. A locked door forced open a face in the dark, a sound we can't explain. But the moments that linger the longest are quieter than that. They're the details that don't fit, the strangers who know too much, the silence that falls in the wrong place at the wrong time. Every story I've told tonight has that in common. None of them ended neatly. None of them gave me the kind of answer that would let me close the book and move on. And maybe that's the point. Some encounters aren't meant to be solved. They're meant to follow you quietly the way headlights sometimes trail in your rearview mirror long after the road should have emptied. So if these stories stay with you, maybe that's because they were always meant to. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, you can follow the channel, share it with someone who enjoys late-night listening, and subscribe for future nights. Before you drift off, I'd like to know, have you ever lived somewhere even briefly that didn't feel like it truly belonged to you? Good night, and sleep well.